Hi everyone, and welcome to Chris Barnes's question and answer session from the Performance MDT webinar. Chris, if you wouldn't mind just giving a quick overview of your presentation for the viewers that didn't get a chance to be involved with the day.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. So the presentation that I gave at the Playermaker webinar was it was an overview of a piece of work that Paul Balsam, Jerome Duracell and myself have been undertaking over the past 6 months, where we've kind of been questioning a little bit the way that current practice pretty universally is heavily reliant on, when we're tracking players, tracking athletes, our go-to metrics tend to be locomotive metrics, standard GPS metrics. And what we've done is we have done quite a bit of work to now develop a system which hopefully opens out that conversation a little bit and truly accounts for the mechanical components in sport. So the presentation was just an overview of that process, really.
Thank you very much, Chris, and we'll fire away with some of the questions that we're going through. So, number one, if you were to pick one monitoring tool to measure your players, what would it be and why?
Conversation. If I was limited to one tool, I think I would throw all of the technology in the bin and just ensure that on an appropriate level and in an appropriate way, that we had meaningful conversations with players. I think so long as you've got good relationships with, obviously with the players, but also with the coaching staff, the amount of valuable information that can be derived from sensibly phrased and addressed questions probably trumps most of the stuff that we can get from technologies.
Yeah, and I agree. It's refreshing to hear, really, to be honest with you, because I think there is a big reliance. We're both involved with technology, but there is a big reliance, and we need to remember the basics. So that's great, Chris. Thank you very much. So following on, which is quite apt that you mentioned about coaches, with all the coaches you've worked with, what was the best method you used in order to communicate sports science with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's not an easy one to answer, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate to work with an awful lot of coaches over the past 20 plus years, and every one of them is different. And there is no absolute answer to that question in that, yeah, this would be my go-to method or my go-to technique to try and engage in a conversation about, okay, you mentioned sports science, but about any aspect of the work that we do. One thing's for sure is we've got to walk before we run in this situation. And before we have any kind of conversation where you may be educating, you may be persuading, you may be cajoling, you have to have a relationship which has a certain amount of trust and respect. So you've got to do the hard yards and the groundwork in terms of trying to truly understand what it is that underpins the working philosophy of the coach that you work with. And every coach, for obvious reasons, is going to be different in that respect. So, you know, I've worked with some highly experienced UK-based coaches, and okay, some of them have been called dinosaurs by people that don't know them. The reality is these people are just as inquisitive as some of the more modern coaches, if you like, but you've got to work out how, when, and where to push their buttons, I suppose. I mean, there's a little story I tell about one of these very experienced English coaches who I won't name, but it seemed like the best place to have a conversation about training and about the information that we were finding on a daily basis, unfortunately, was in the staff shower room while he was having his post-training shower, which was an interesting experience. But it was a time when he had 2 or 3 minutes available, which he could dedicate and devote to the conversation that we had. I guess the one other thing that I would say is, on that very point, coaches are really, really busy people. I think everybody underestimates the amount of pressure they have upon them. And over the course of a day, there's people from all walks of the club are trying to buy that 2 minutes of time. So the time that I want with a coach has to be used wisely and used well. So make sure that you do have a message that is meaningful. Make sure that you've got something that you truly understand what the message is you want to get across. And don't expect any more than a couple of minutes with them, because they have got other things that they do need to move on to, I guess. Probably haven't answered the question. I mean, and that's because, like I say, each and every one of these people are different. And it's our responsibility to actually spend and invest time to actually learn what makes them tick before we can truly expect to impact and influence on the way they work.
No worries, thank you, Kristen. Yeah, I think you did answer the question. To be honest with you, I've heard that shower story before, so I was wondering if you were going to bring that up or not. So I'm glad you did before I asked that question. So number 3, and this is going back more towards technology again now. So what are the future technological developments that will support practitioners in the future?
Yeah, I think before we start trying to crystal ball gaze into the future, I've been really fortunate that I get an opportunity to go around a lot of different parts of the world and visit people, visit places, and observe the way that people do actually work in their day-to-day role and how they engage with some of the technologies that are available. And everybody's trying to do the same things, but everybody goes about it slightly differently. But what I would say is, in an awful lot of cases, before we start looking to what the next thing is, I think we've got an awful lot of work to do to truly get the best value out of the technologies that we're using at present. So there's an awful lot of money in some of these professional sports that we work with, and there's money for clubs and organizations to acquire every piece of kit that you could possibly imagine. I can't then believe that people with a lot of these technologies that we currently have will simply use them to generate and create a sheet of paper, a spreadsheet with a load of numbers on, and won't actually, I guess, do the due diligence to think, okay, is there any value in this information? Why am I collecting the numbers that I'm collecting? What exactly do they align with in the sport that I'm looking at? And most importantly, which bits of information are important? So where is there's an awful lot of noise in data in sport. And where does that noise begin and end? And where truly is there some meaning in some of the numbers that we produce? All that having been said, you mentioned about the future. My guess is, if we think about the information that we are collecting during training, let's say, at the moment we spend a lot of time quantifying the external work that's being performed by athletes and players, and we've got limited ability at the moment to monitor the internal responses, the internal load. And I think that in the future we will probably have available to us much better, much more reliable, much more sophisticated methods of collecting information on some of the key biomarkers there that will give us insight into how players truly respond to training.
I suppose this is just a follow-up question just from my own interest as well, because do you feel as though like we're kind of going full circle at the minute? Like there was obviously when heart rates first came out, there was a big interest, and obviously like you'll have been part of the users that use the old Polar T1 that you used to slide into the purple thing, which is still arguably one of the best heart rate belts I've come across. And we seem to be GPS evolution coming around more external. Now we're coming back to the internal, just obviously in a different way. Do you think that we've kind of lost the vision of the purpose of internal and external load along the way?
Yeah, totally. Everybody refers to the technologies, there's a whole host of different manufacturers out there, but everybody seems to refer to a lot of these technologies that people wear between the shoulder blades as GPS devices. And they focus on the GPS information. And in order to get good quality heart rate data, we have to invest an awful lot of time and effort in getting the confidence of the players and getting the trust of the players in this information, and also convincing them as to why we need to adopt good practice in order to get good quality data. And I think an awful lot of people haven't invested that time and effort in getting good quality heart rate data. And so when they do come to examine any information they get at the end of a session, there may be quite a bit of noise in it. There may be quite a few anomalies in that information. And so they have a choice then. You either invest time or you decide that, okay, this isn't something that's necessarily for me. The other side of it is, players are players, and they may complain about wearing heart rate monitors, tell you that they're uncomfortable and all the rest of it. And if they are not getting anything back themselves from these internal load measures, then I understand why they may well try it on and they might complain about wearing the devices. So I do think things are coming round again. At the end of the day, in isolation, what is external load? It's the work that's being performed. But the process of training is about preparing players to get them in the best possible shape, the best condition to turn out on a Saturday. And in order to have some confidence that you're doing that, you don't just need to understand how much work they've performed from a locomotive and a mechanical perspective, but you need to understand how they as individuals are actually reacting and responding to that load. So yeah, I'm delighted to see that there seems to be a bit of a move now towards collection of internal load data, and as far as I'm concerned, long may it continue.
No worries. Thank you very much, Chris. Going back to the questions, 2 more questions to go through. So, for monitoring training loads, do you think it is worth using a multi-mechanical modelling method, or do you think this is an oversimplification?
I do think it's worth using this model, and I've had a number of conversations with Jack Sharkey at Villa in relation to this, and I know I've seen a couple of presentations that Jack's done on it. One of the nice things, one of the real strengths of the presentation for me, is simplicity. So very often it's a lot more difficult to present something in simplistic terms than it is to actually present it in absolutely complex and complicated terms. And you go back to one of the earlier questions. I was talking about relationships between ourselves and players and with coaches. And these relationships, like I say, they're built on trust and respect, but they're also built on the dialogue that you have and you develop with them. And what we need to do, if we want to have some kind of a dialogue in relation to the information we're collecting, we have to make sure we calibrate it in the first instance, such that that conversation isn't threatening, and it isn't one that may be beyond the comprehension of the people we're speaking with. So I'm a huge fan of starting simple, and I don't think there's any such thing as too simple.
Thank you very much, Chris. And final question from the audience was, do you think that it is important for research to use a combination of video footage and GPS, and I'll just add inertial sensors, to give context to movement in football?
Yeah, the key word there is context. If the end user of all of this work is going to be the practitioner, the coach, or the manager, then we do need a visual layer of context, because that is where their expertise truly comes to the fore. So we might argue that we perhaps have a little bit more expertise in terms of making sense of data and numbers. But to have a joined up conversation with the people that really matter, we have to ensure that they're comfortable with the context. And so if we can do that, if we can integrate data or numbers, if you like, with the optical stuff, with the video, then we've got a much better chance of actually having an impact in the work that we do within the applied environment.
Always. Thank you very much, Chris. And that's been great. And